So using stats, comparing year over year is actually quite challenging right now, given that our market is so dramatically different compared to this time last year. So I wanted to go through and just talk about a few different ways that you can gather information and create the stories to educate your clients. After all, a realtor's job is to be the resource in all things real estate for our clients. So another part to that is that people tend to engage more or retain more information through stories. So when you're looking at numbers or market information and anything that's relevant to real estate, what stories can we tell that will get people engaged and increase their attention to your marketing program? So how do you do that? First, we need to know a few things about the market, and you also need a medium to share your information, whether or not that's your email newsletter or social media or however you're contacting your database on a monthly basis. But it boils down to the basics of business and just having a list of people and providing valuable content to those people so that they can look to you as their resource. Here's a few things, different areas that I look to for the stats that we send out on a weekly and monthly basis. And I'm going to kind of run through a few examples of what I'm looking at and what interesting storylines that we can find from this. So obviously, when you're dealing with market evaluations and that sort of thing, you're definitely going to want to be focusing on the most current and up-to-date information for those. But when we're looking at market trends, Area Hub actually has a fantastic provincial stats report. It breaks down everything from the different segments, and I'm going to dive into, let's use Red Deer. When you're going in here, just go to detailed section, and then it will have more information. But this is actually the 10-year line here, and it's interesting to see, this is from March, obviously, how much further ahead March's numbers were in central Alberta, which previously to a few months ago was a very challenged market. Now, some of the things that I'm looking at, I'm glancing through those, but I love this line as far as what segment of the area is doing or the market is doing. Sales are up 59%. New listings are also up 58%. So that tells me that our inventory is eventually going to start to grow. We're actually down year over year 15% in Red Deer for the detached segment. Months of supply, how long a market can sustain itself without any new inventory coming on. Really a competitive balanced market. And then what's happening in the price points. This is also really interesting to see where the sales activity is happening. Now, as much of the rest of the province, we're seeing sales increased in all price ranges across the board. And then this is where you can actually break down some of the 10-year averages. So it's an easy way to gather the information in a larger area to be able to do some numbers. And it does take a little bit of time, but you will benefit from it, to take the 5 or 10-year averages and compare those stats to what we're currently experiencing. It tells a much broader story. And that's kind of where we're looking at to get this information. Total residential. Now, next point, I want to jump over into some different boards actually do some really good jobs at different community marketing and that sort of thing. So I can't go through all the boards that we serve, being that there's 7 of them, but I'm going to use Kara and Krebs as an example. So if you go into the market details and stats, click here. That was actually realtorlink.ca. Please don't forget about realtorlink.ca, as there is a lot of really good information in those markets. Now, where is that one? So if we want to go to, let's say, Camrose. Now, each board does have a different variation of this, but this is, again, really useful information to go back year over year, and you can see March in Camrose was really, really strong. 2020, it took a little bit of time to build momentum, but they continued to build, and now they're exceeding the previous markets. Same thing with average sale price, average days to sell. It just gives you some talking point on what's happening in the market, and we're going back further than just COVID time. Same thing when you're dealing with CREB. I have to log into this one. Now, I was worried about that. I'll try one more time. Sometimes when you're logged into different boards, I have a tough time getting to the board that I actually want. All right. So when you're going into the housing market data here, yes, you have the monthly stats, but one of the things that I really appreciate about this program is you can actually scroll in to the different communities, and let's say I want to do Britannia for an example, pull up the monthly, and then you have your 10-year histories. Going back, seeing what's happened in the market, of course, I picked one of the slowest markets in Calgary because there's never a lot of sales in Britannia, but it's interesting to be able to go back and look at that information. Point being is that the data is there if you know where to look. So diving in and checking out that information is critical to be able to be the professional that all of your clients depend you to be. Now, an interesting one when we're diving into Realtor.ca insights, and everybody should be getting an email that breaks this down, but you can actually pull up the local insights to determine where people are looking and what they're looking for. So let's use Calgary for an example, update the city, and then you can actually see the minimum price points that people are searching Realtor.ca for, the maximum sites, the number of bedrooms, the bathrooms, land size, building types. So detached homes carrying the bulk of the market, under 500,000 is the primary searches, residential properties, and then it gets into commercial. But some of the stuff that I really like about this is, well, this is actually interesting. 5% of people are looking for pools. That's probably because people are spending a lot of time in their backyards. So that one's kind of funny. But this is really where I'm getting a storyline from, because you can see first-time buyers have made a massive move into the market, which has really unlocked that property ladder. Bulk of the users are in that 25 to 45 age range. Now, these are all your first-time buyers, and what has unlocked the rest of the property ladder and making sure that we're able to move up. And so what I mean by that is that most of the buyers in our market previous to, let's call it mid-2020, had a home that they needed to sell in order to move up. So now that all of the first-time buyers that have been really saving all of their money, or they don't have anywhere to spend their disposable income, are making a move into the real estate markets, that's unlocked the rest of the market. So it's a really interesting trend that's going on. Another one that is directly tied to that is the savings rate. So our Canada household savings rate is through the roof right now, and I'm going to be really interested to see where the first quarter of 2021 ended up. These stats are always lagging behind, but you can see when we were all shut down, savings went through the roof, and now it's balanced out to around 12.7. But this, combined with low interest rates, has really created a purchasing power for our first-time home buyers and our move-up buyers that has unlocked the market. Now, we know who's moving into the market, but why is that happening? That's your savings rate. That's your interest rates. The other interesting program to look at is the Alberta Economic Dashboard. How is this coming to be when the media is just telling us that there's nothing but doom and gloom? I love this because they keep it relatively up to date with most stats. And the things that I wanted to really point out were our unemployment rate is actually as low as it's been since last March. So the unemployment rate is dropping. We're getting back to, Albertans are getting back to work. This is going to be an interesting one to see if this is going to continue to drop. The number of people on employment insurance. Energy sector is always an interesting to watch. Natural gas continues to do well. Construction's doing great. Agriculture and forestry. Business and corporations is made a huge jump. So people are just getting into business for themselves. Our economic output is up. I also think this is an interesting storyline because while our net migration is down, people are still moving here. So we're still seeing people migrating from other countries and other provinces. And while the bottom was Q2 of 2020, we've slowly been rebounding since. So I love that number. And just going through and actually diving into some actual statistics that we can tell a good story with that the media likely isn't telling. Now, even for the naysayers that think the market's going to drop out, this was the economic report that was done based on the deferral programs put in place through 2020. They compared it to natural disasters. I've done a report out to the company about this before, but I wanted to highlight the numbers that they were projecting back when they sent this out. Let me scroll down. So the yellow line here is the simulated mortgages that would go into arrears if the government didn't do anything with deferral rates, which we would have hit a peak of 1.29% of mortgages that go into into arrears. And that would have happened at the end of Q4 2020. What ended up happening, or they were projecting a height to be at the end of Q2 of 0.53% with payment deferrals. So they were anticipating to be able to keep more people in their homes and their mortgages paid by having a deferral rate, and then we're expecting to see that the arrears hit end of Q2 in 2021. I think this is fascinating because what ended up happening, and I'll send out a link to all of these, or an email with all of these links so that you guys can take a look. I'm going to scroll down to Alberta. And I don't know if you can see these numbers okay, but these are the numbers of mortgages that went into arrears in Alberta alone. So I found this fascinating, the fact that end of January, the mortgages in arrears was at 0.52%, which was only up 0.03% over March of 2020. So not even that, 0.01%. So despite the peak was actually in the summertime, June and July of 2020. And I'm anticipating to see this climb slightly based on their projections, but we've actually handled it incredibly well. And this is an interesting one even for the people out there that like to focus on foreclosures, is the fact that we've never exceeded more than 1% of mortgages in Alberta to go into arrears, and that was in the early 80s. But that was an interesting one for me. So I guess the point of all of this and the market stats, and I know I breezed through it quickly because numbers are boring, but the point of it all is to stay in tune with the markets, what's positive happening in the markets, what's happening in the economy, what's actually being experienced. And I know that different people have different perspectives about what's been happening in the economy and the real estate markets, but we can choose to grab onto the negative that the media is portraying, or we can grab onto some of the interesting stories that are out there. Last week, I saw a story about a tech company moving into Calgary, and they took 20,000 square feet of downtown office space. So those kind of stories are happening, and we're seeing a really solid, healthy market out there. it's our job to know the information, gather the information, and then tell the story so that people are engaged and appreciate our marketing. And really, that's the benefit of being able to choose what story that you want to tell. So I guess to close, ultimately, it depends on what story you want to tell about the markets and how you engage in your day-to-day activity and keeping in flow with your clients and keeping them educated. But that's this week's meeting. I'm a little bit over time, so I apologize for that. But I hope that you guys enjoyed it and wish you guys a very great week.